Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate your time. Let's start. We have a full agenda. We need to move through it quickly because we have a lot of good information, and all of the information will be sent out. And also we'll make sure people know that we have the recording. So if you want to start, Laurel.
Yeah, I will. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this will start. Let me know if you can see that. Thank you so much for letting us join today.
Oh, Laurel, we can't see anything.
Well, I have to push share. Aha. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for allowing us to come and just give you really a high level about 4th Street Clinic, who we are, what we do. I think probably everybody's driven by us about 17,000 times. We're right there on the corner of 4th South and 4th West. So our mission is to help Utahns experiencing homelessness improve their health and equity of life, or quality of, I can't even see the whole thing on my thing. You can read that because I can't read it. And it's going to keep going here. So just, I'm going to let this play in the background and keep talking to you because I think you can probably multitask. But we have been around since 1988. We see primarily folks that are homeless. We are a federally qualified health center, and what that means is we are able to see people at a low to no, I'm going to stop this. It's going to make me crazy. Let's see, maybe I can stop it. Low cost to no cost. We go on a sliding scale fee for that. These are all the things that we provide. Our demographics are really, we see about 5,000 patients every year. You can see where they all sit. Most of them have no insurance, 40% living in that shelters. So it's a big lift for us. Those are our clinical statistics right there. And then I'm not a great PowerPoint presentation person, so I'm going to let it go to there. And then I'm going to go to stop. So that's just a very, very quick and dirty high level overview. I'm going to stop it. There we go. So high level overview with those slides. Again, I'm not a good PowerPoint person, but we've been around for a long period of time. We serve about 5,000 patients every year. We see in about 25,000 visits. We have a full array of health services that we do, from dental health, behavioral health, obviously medical. We have an on-site pharmacy. We have a mobile medical, which you may have seen out and about. We also do what we call street medicine, which is really on the street, really going to like the North Temples or down to the rivers, whereas our mobile clinic goes to fixed sites. So it's a very big operation. It's about a $10 million operation. We are federally funded. So we get our base grant from the feds, which is about $3 million. We have a $10 million budget. So there is some shortfall there that we make up for through, we do accept Medicare and Medicaid and other insurances, and then also through private funding as well. I think, we get a lot of questions about what we've been doing through COVID, and that's, just want to kind of touch on that. So we haven't seen patients from the very beginning doing testing through COVID. We put in our first test in March of 2020. And we have, I always, like, the Tokyo Olympics messed me up to think we're now in 2021. So I have to really think about those years. So we started doing our first testing in 2020. We tested in 2020 over 10,000 individuals for COVID. We started right away in January of 21 doing the vaccinations. In our population, it's a very difficult population to vaccinate. So we are at about a 10%. 10 to 25% is kind of where we look at for that. So a lower percentage of people getting vaccinated in the homeless population. But that holds true for any of our immunizations, really. It also holds true for flu vaccines as well. One of the things I think we did really well during the pandemic was being able to pivot. So we were able to see people outside in our, we did like a makeshift MASH tent, if you will. I'm sure if people have driven by, like, give me a thumbs up. Have you seen all of our tents? Yeah, yeah, and Jasmine's shaking her head. Yep, yep. It's a bit of a tent city out there, so we were able to do that, and that was the safest way to see patients. It was the safest way to for our patients as well as for our staff to be seen. So people were screened outside. They saw people in the tents, and I'm happy to report that we had no transmission within the clinic. So no patient to staff, no staff to staff, because we had really strict protocols in place for all of those. You know, PPE and masks and whatnot to make it happen. I've been working from home for the last 18 months, which has been an interesting process. So I think some of those statistics that we went through, about 65% of the people that we see are men, 35% are women. We really do, in our mobile clinic, I want to talk about, and I know I just trying to be cognizant of time. I think our mobile clinic has been a really interesting process that we put online in 2019. When we're going to fix sites. So we work within our community partners. So we go to the YWCA, we go to the 3 resource centers, we go to First Step House, we go to all of the Port Road homes, so Palmer Court, Midvale Family Shelter, the mobile clinic services, all of those. So our scope is really wide in where we go and what we do. I would say the one thing that 4th Street Clinic does really well is a lot of people go, you know, you guys do homeless healthcare. So when something comes up that's a homeless healthcare issue, they point to us, right? Well, 4th Street Clinic will do it. We'll figure it out. So we've been pivoting and trying to figure out where we're going and the next directions with medical respite and having people have been in quarantine and isolation in a vulnerable population motel during COVID. So those are kind of our next steps of where we're going to head to. So I know that's really quick and dirty and probably really disjointed, but I just wanted to leave the last, you know, couple minutes for anybody that has questions, because I know that, and like I said, that was very random and fast, but any questions that you might have before you guys get onto your heavy agenda.
I'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, with all the development that's going on down there, are you guys going to stay?
Well, Landon, we own our building, so that's our bonus, right? We own our building. We actually own the whole campus. So there's that north building, we call it the south, or the north building, the main clinic, and then there's the south building, which is the brown building that sits across the parking lot. So we own all of that space. So our goal is to stay there. There's no reason that we would need to sell it. I think if we sold it to buy something new, we probably wouldn't be able to buy anything new with the money that we got to sell it. So I think it's like everybody's sitting in your house right now, right? You're like, I could sell it for so much money, but then what am I going to buy? Where am I going to go? So our plan is to stay where we are.
I said this when we started. I'm Cindy Kindred and I work with the clinic, but we hope that if you have a community council, or if you're associated with the community council, or if you would like us to either send materials or come and make a presentation, we're more than happy to do so, because I know that we impact the community in many ways, primarily because we're really the only provider of homeless health services in Salt Lake. And so if you're interested in learning more, or if we can come out and talk to your group, we are more than happy to do that.
And what else
Our
can we do?
presentation longer and, not on Zoom, but we'll get there.
Laurel, this is Janet Hemming.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I'm pinch hitting for Toby Larson up in Yellcrest. We're going through a little bit of a transition, but I wanted to ask you, what is your upside? How much more capacity do you have? Are you at capacity? Do you need more resources? Is the situation that you face, do the numbers keep growing and growing and growing? If you could just recap and summarize that.
Sure. I would say with where we are right now, we are at capacity in terms of the staffing that we have now and the facility that we have now. We're just in the process of engaging with our board a strategic plan to address some of those capacity issues. I think the biggest issue that probably people are hearing right now is really the beds of where people are going to be, in the winter shelters or in the summertime. So we're really pushing the State Homelessness Council to do the like 300 beds non-congregant space. And then we would run those, respite beds. But right now, Janet, there is a shortage of healthcare professionals. So really even just hiring is difficult. So it's a huge burnout in the healthcare professionals. So trying to hire anybody is super, super hard. So we're at capacity, but we want to build, but then you also have the problem with the numbers of people available. So it's kind of a double-edged sword of what you're asking me. I think we're willing to grow. We're willing to look at it and see where we can do it and do it well. But we also are going to need, number one, we're going to need resources, funding, and then we're going to need people. So I don't know that 100% answers your question. It's sort of a wishy-washy answer, and I totally get it.
No, I think you did a nice job. It's hard to predict the future, but I think one of the questions, are your numbers gradually growing every year? I would think that they would be, but I was just curious to what you're seeing, or have they kind of stabilized?
No, they grow. We grow about 3% every year. 2020, we dipped down a little bit because of the months of, we just, everybody kind of did that true lockdown. And then, so probably about March, April, we didn't have a lot of folks coming through. We were doing a lot of testing, getting that ramped up. And then suddenly people were like, yep, I still have diabetes. I still have hypertension. I still have wounds. I still have, acute needs. So then people started coming in. So we're predicting, yes, a 3% increase in growth. And I would love to not say that at some point. Other questions? And then I'll let you, I know that just, again, I know you've got a big agenda. Ellen wants to be like, let's get going. So please feel free to contact me. Yeah, Jasmine has my email. I'm happy to come and talk to other groups, give it a longer period of time to really get into some discussion. Happy to have that conversation. If you are ever interested in coming down to the clinic for a tour, please reach out to Jasmine. She can get you in touch with me. I'm also super easy to find if you just go to the clinic's webpage at 4thstreetclinic.org. Super easy to find. We are bringing people down for tours. We're not doing big tours. Again, we're still masked in the clinic. We're still, we really have never left that red level in terms of our PPE and what we anticipate our staff and our visitors to be wearing. So it is masked. It is pretty quiet in there sometimes. So please come down and take a tour if you're at all interested, and reach out to me.
How do people know about you?
Say that again?
How do people know about you? If I'm a homeless person, who's going to tell me that I have a resource?
That's a good question. So it's a very big underground of homelessness. People are going to tell other people. And then if you engage in any of the points of access, right? So if you come through one of the resource centers, either the Gail Miller or the men's shelter, we're right there. So they would let you know. We're right across the street from the rescue mission. We interface. We have a Saturday clinic at Catholic Community Services. So we work with the Asian Association to work with the women are being sex trafficked. So we are out there and about. We're also in, like I said, we have a street medicine. So we literally go with a van into the camps and go around and say, hey, we knock on the tent, as you will, and be, hey, 4th Street Clinic, can we help you? So we are out and about. So people will see us.
Do you have many children?
So that's the smallest percentage of the 5,000 that we see. Under 18, I think is about 7% of our population. We see the kids at the Midvale shelter.
Families.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you
It's nice to
very
see
much.
everybody.
Thank you both.
David Shearer, tell
Thank you
Brenda
so much.
hello. And we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Lucinda.
Thank you so much.
Going to move on to David's presentation. David Shearer is going to give us the lowdown on the inland port.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know about the lowdown. It's a very complicated, large topic, but I'll try to give you sort of what I understand to be the basics. I'm David Shearer, by the way. I am the chair of the Capitol Hill Neighborhood Council, and I have been involved in efforts to understand the port basically since it was created in 2018. I'm an urban planner by profession, and so that's the perspective that I bring to this. I understand that cities need development. My questions have to do with how this development is being run and whether this is actually going to be in the best interest of the citizens of this state. The Utah Inland Port is proposed to be the largest economic development in the history of the state. If it proceeds, it will cost Utah taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, and Utahns need to know the facts about the port before they decide if this is a wise investment. Oh, I haven't shared my screen, have I? I'm very sorry. Let me quickly do that. There, are you guys seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, first of all, yeah, this thing is scrolling badly. Okay, it's an inland port actually. Inland ports exist in several U.S. cities. They relieve congestion at coastal ports by allowing shippers to go through customs at inland port rather than at the coastal port. Oh, all right. The Utah Inland Port Authority, sometimes referred to as Uefa, was created by the state legislature in 2018. It governs 25 miles known as the Uefa jurisdictional area, shown here in blue.
David?
Basically the northwest quadrant city. Yes, I'm sorry.
You're really hard to hear. You're
I am.
fluctuating.
Oh,
Your
I'm
voice is
sorry.
fluctuating.
The microphone that's in my is that better if I sit closer to it like this?
I think it must the rain. I think it's the rain where you're at, David. The internet is really just garbled. So
Really? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, and it might be,
Where I'm sitting.
well, David, it might be because you started presenting. Sometimes with Zoom, if you start doing a lot of things and your internet connection isn't great, it slows it down. So if you want to stop sharing, I can share it from my screen and you can just tell me to move the slides. If you want.
Okay, I think the show that I sent you not quite the show that I was doing, but let's do what you say.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay, and you are down. Is this the right? This is the right one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's basically it here. I just need to do some. All right, a little awkward. All right, let's try again. Okay, so the Utah Inland Port is shown here in blue. It's about 25 square miles, and it comprises almost a fifth of Salt Lake City's total area. Most of it lies within Salt Lake City. While fossil fuel and mining interests are represented on the board that governs it, it has no members who are expert in public health or conservation. The board consists of 11 members appointed by various politicians, mostly at the state level. Being appointed, the board is not accountable to the public and has proved unresponsive to public input. Recently, 2 community members you may know were dismissed from Uefa's Community Advisory Board and replaced by energy industry advocates. Next slide, please. Uefa exists to promote development within its jurisdictional area. The main tool it uses are financial subsidies that it gives to private landowners. The land within Uefa's jurisdiction is all privately owned, and most of it is owned by 2 companies. Next slide, please. Yeah. The state legislature gave Uefa the power to overturn land use decisions and overrule local governments. This guarantees that land use regulation continues to favor developers. By taking land use control away from local governments, the legislature deprived them of one of their most effective tools for protecting their residents. Next slide. Uefa receives money from the state legislature. It received about $20 million this year, and every year its budget grows. However, most of its funding will come from property taxes on new development within its jurisdiction. This means that if a piece of property today is worth, say, $10,000 and a warehouse is built on it so that its value raises to 1 million, Uefa collects the property tax on the $990,000 difference. This tax on the added value is called the property tax increment. Before Uefa, this money would have gone to municipalities and school districts. Utah taxpayers have no voice in how these funds are used except in electing state legislatures. Next slide, please. Why do the developers need subsidies? Well, first of all, the area almost totally lacks infrastructure. As most of you know, the area north of I-80 is almost completely undeveloped. Secondly, the soil in the area becomes soft during earthquakes, which is a process called liquefaction, which destroys buildings by causing parts of their foundations to sink, as shown in this picture. Special expensive foundations are needed to overcome this. This caused cost overruns and area reductions in the state prison currently being built in that area. Next slide. So far, within the Uefa jurisdictional area, roads, sewers, water lines, and power lines have been built, which now primarily serve the state prison. 6 warehouses have also been built, and several more are under construction. These are our ordinary run-of-the-mill warehouses, nothing green or special about them. Together with the parking lots that surround them, they cover nearly 100% of the land with surfaces that don't absorb water, and this creates polluted runoff that can flow into waterways. Next slide. Uefa's strategic business plan, which was issued in May of last year, projects 152 million square feet of new buildings when the port is complete. This will generate enormous increases in traffic and water usage. The Union Pacific Railroad has a rail terminal in the port area, but a second rail terminal operated by another railroad company is essential to the port's viability in order to keep shipping rates competitive. So far, and I say this as a planner, no real planning has been done for the port. This prevents any assessment of the impacts of the port on air quality, water usage, traffic, employment, or financial viability. Next slide. Who will benefit from the port? Developers are practically guaranteed to profit from the port thanks to the taxpayer finance subsidies. However, it's unclear what benefits working Utahns will get. Next slide, please. Uefa claims that the port will attract companies that will create thousands of well-paid high-tech jobs. Next slide. In fact, it is far from certain that many such companies will choose to locate within the port. In inland ports in other US cities, most of the jobs created have been warehouse jobs. There have been high turnover in these jobs, indicating their undesirability. Many of these jobs pay low wages and don't provide benefits such as healthcare. Furthermore, many of these jobs are likely to be reduced or eliminated by automation in the near future. Next slide. The inland port is not limited to its site in Salt Lake City. Recent legislation allows satellite ports to be created anywhere in the state. Several of these sites are specifically proposed as fossil fuel transloading facilities. Next slide. Everyone knows the Salt Lake Valley suffers from unhealthy air quality. Much of our air pollution comes from motor vehicles. Next slide. The port will generate enormous increases in the number of cars and trucks traveling our roadways. The completed port will generate approximately 69,000 additional truck trips every day and an additional 152,000 car trips every day. Besides tailpipe emissions, recent research has shown that a substantial amount of pollution comes from friction created by tires on the road, brakes, and other sources. This source of pollution has not been accounted for in current plans to improve air quality. In spite of repeated public demands, Uefa has refused to study the impacts of this tremendous increase in vehicular traffic on our air quality. Next slide. There are other types of vehicles and equipment in the port that will affect our air. Dozens of diesel-powered switcher engines are used in Union Pacific's existing rail yard. These are antiquated and emit enormous amounts of pollutants. They run 24/7, and the second rail yard could double their impact. In the past, the state has given millions of dollars in subsidies to the Union Pacific to upgrade just a few of these engines. So it seems unlikely that UP will upgrade them voluntarily. Next slide. The port will also generate large increases in air cargo flights, which are also a major contributor to air pollution. Next slide. Another impact of port development is water pollution due to the runoff. This is rainfall that buildings and pavements prevent from being absorbed by the ground. This water accumulates pollutants that have settled on these surfaces. If not properly handled, these pollutants end up in streams and groundwater. Untreated runoff can promote the growth of invasive plant species. It also enters animals' food sources, harming them and any humans who consume them as food. Next slide. Due to its proximity to the port, Salt Lake City's west side will be disproportionately affected by the pollution caused by port activities. This will greatly compound the long-standing environmental injustices suffered by minority and low-income people for the sake of corporate profits. Next slide. The port will require extensive spraying of insecticide to control mosquitoes and other biting insects. The wind will carry these chemicals into West Side homes and schools. The most commonly used insecticides are neurotoxins, chemicals that affect the human nervous system. These have been shown to harm fetuses and children in particular. Next slide. In particular, the development of the port will destroy thousands of acres of wildlife habitat, now home to pronghorn and many other species. Next slide. In particular, migratory birds will be impacted by the port. The Great Salt Lake is recognized as an area of hemispheric importance for migratory birds, a major stopover for millions of birds every year. The lake provides feeding and nesting grounds for many species of shorebirds, while upland areas near the shore provide habitat for owls, hawks, and other species. Disturbing or destroying these areas will harm bird populations throughout the Western Hemisphere. Next slide. The huge increases of traffic that I mentioned earlier will overload our roadways. Taxpayers will have to provide hundreds of millions of dollars to enlarge existing roadways and perhaps build new ones in order to prevent widespread gridlock. This adds huge hidden costs to the port. Next slide. To counter the environmental risks of the port, Uefa claims that it will be green. This word is conveniently vague. It seems to promise a clean, sustainable development. Next slide. In reality, however, the port cannot be clean or sustainable. Electric vehicles will only be a fraction of all vehicles on the road for years to come. Older, dirty diesel trucks are only replaced very slowly. Electric vehicles are no better when it comes to pollution from friction. In any event, habitat destruction is inevitable. In short, there really is no such thing as a green port. Next slide. Neither Uefa nor the state government has done anything to bolster electric vehicle use at the port. Uefa has refused to commit to using any of its money to incentivize developers to implement energy-saving measures. Next slide. Skip that, please. And that. Thank you. Political and financial interests in Utah would have us believe that the Utah Inland Port is a quote-unquote done deal to discourage public from questioning the assumptions behind the port and its real impact on their lives. But the port is not a done deal. It has just begun development, and key pieces such as the second rail yard are far from certain. A poll by the Salt Lake Tribune found that 60% of city residents oppose the port. The public must demand greater transparency from Uefa and have meaningful input in its development to minimize its harmful effects on our health and quality of life. Next slide, please. Popular opposition to the port has already had real impacts on its development. First, it's become clear to everyone that the port is controversial. Potential investors are wary of controversy because it raises doubts about the port's future. Activists have raised numerous questions about the impacts of the port that deserve study before the port proceeds. More and more people are becoming aware of the potential harm the port will do to their lives. Finally, by engaging respectfully in the Uefa board's public meetings, port activists have revealed the board's lack of transparency. Not only has the board refused to address many legitimate concerns, but their procedures prevent meaningful public input in important decisions. Next slide. Questions are being pursued about whether aspects of the port's development violate the National Environmental Policy Act, local runoff treatment requirements, and open meeting requirements. Using public record requests, information is being obtained from government agencies that is being withheld from the public about the port and satellite ports. Next slide. If the port is allowed to proceed, Utah will be set on a path of no return towards an unsustainable future with more air pollution, worse public health, and further sacrifice of natural areas for a narrow vision of economic development. The port represents another sacrifice of the public interest for short-term corporate profit. Next slide, please. So to summarize, the Utah Inland Port is being touted as an economic boon, but its proponents have overlooked or downplayed the likely harm it will do to our environment, particularly to our air quality and wildlife. These harms will again fall disproportionately on the residents of Salt Lake City's west side. The port's advocates claim that the port will be green, but in reality, the port's operations are inherently unsustainable and proposed mitigation measures pale in comparison to the harms it will cause. The port's governing body, the Utah Inland Port Authority, has ignored constant public demands to evaluate, let alone address, the impacts the port will have on public health. Many people believe that the port is a done deal, but it is not. It is a project that has barely gotten underway, an enormously expensive public project whose details are not being openly shared with the people. The people of Utah have every right to question and demand transparency of the officials in charge of the port. Should we decide that the port is not in our best interests or those of our children and grandchildren, we have the power to stop it. The public is largely, okay, no, that's fine. The public is largely unaware of the port and the risks that it poses. Community groups like those you represent can help raise public awareness and meaningful, real public dialogue about the port and how it is developed. Concerted public action is needed to ensure that the port creates maximum benefit for people and minimizes harm to our communities. Thank you.
David,
Yes.
you mentioned 3 companies, but you didn't name them.
Okay, the 2 companies are called the Colmena Group, which is a company that develops industrial space, and Utah Kennecott Copper.
Oh, okay. Which is not a Utah company.
Not a Utah company. It is a Australian company, I think. Any other questions?
So who's driving this? Just our legislators?
I'm sorry, say again?
Who's driving this?
Well, the legislature certainly supports it.
Why? What are they benefiting?
They believe, I think, that this represents important economic development project for the state. But I have not seen much by way of proof that this will actually work. And the information that would be necessary in order to make that evaluation, along with the information that would be necessary to evaluate the port's impact on air, traffic, water quantity too, by the way. 152 million square feet of warehouses needs 10 million gallons of water a day. But none of that information, which the Port Authority should have generated, has been done. And so we are operating in an information vacuum and running on the assumption by the legislature and some others that this is simply bound to work somehow.
How many people currently work for the Utah Port Authority or whatever this organization is?
I think there's only like 5 or 6 employees. They have an executive director, an associate director, somebody in charge of business development, some executive assistants. It's a very small group of people right now.
And Dorothy had a question, David. She's just unmuting.
Oh, well, I was going to just add to David's comment about the staff. I mean, they have a lot of funding for consultants. And that, so the staff is, if you look at their budget, there's a lot more money for consultants, even though the staff that's full-time employees of the authority is seems to be quite small. And I think, thank you, David, because I think this is a really helpful presentation. So since West Point basically houses the prison and the Inland Port Authority, this has been a real issue for us. So this is very I'd be interested in getting people's comments about how helpful they thought the presentation was, and if it was something that engaged people, because I think, that's one of the things that we've been talking about. The other thing is that I went to the open house for The Point. The Point is the development at the point of the mountain that's being developed now that the prison has moved out to West Point. And I'm wondering, maybe David, you could talk about the differences between those two developments and how they've developed so differently.
Yeah. Well, The Point is governed nominally in a similar way. It has an authority over it, but the way they've conducted their public input process has been very different. They had numerous public meetings and gathered public input, which has visibly affected the plan that now exists for The Point. So the Point of the Mountain Authority has been much more open and receptive to public input than has the Utah Inland Port Authority Board.
Okay, Judy has a question. Judy,
No, I don't think so.
you have a hand up?
Not that I knew about.
Okay.
I've got a question, David. Can you address the status of the city's lawsuit and how that might impact things if that is successful?
Well, I think maybe Rachel would be a better person to comment on that. I don't have any particular knowledge of the status of the lawsuit.
Sure, I'd be happy to chime in. Thanks. And Councilmember Rogers and Councilmember Ferris are also here, so happy to let them pipe in. So as you know, we did oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court at the end of April, and we're expecting a decision from the Supreme Court really any time now. And I think the key with the lawsuit, and what I think is probably most important really for all of us, is the tax increment piece. And as David went into some detail about the fact that when the Inland Port was created, that they were able to take all of the tax increment, not just from Salt Lake City, but from the county and the other taxing entities as well. This really kind of cuts us off at the knees in terms of what we can require of developers out there. It's difficult for us to have the right tools to be able to, incentivize and require the kinds of environmental protections that we would like to require for the development that's happening out on the Inland Port. I also would just, I'm not 100% sure if I've had a chance to digest David's comprehensive presentation, but I do think it's important to remember that while the original law that created the Inland Port did allow the Inland Port Authority to overrule any of the local land use jurisdiction, that's actually not the case now. So, we can talk in more detail about that, but that's, that's one thing that stood out to me about your presentation, David, that you might want to reconsider. The other, a couple of other pieces that I might throw out there for consideration, the area north of I-80, which is, well, a lot of the area is privately owned, as you know, and always has been. So it's a long time in the making that the landowners out there, I'm sure, have had different development plans. And the city, as I think you probably all know, has been working to master plan that area for a long time. So this is, something that's obviously morphed into a state entity that's not entirely in the city's control. But we've worked hard to try to regain some of the tax increment and some of the land use control. So, the overlays, the Inland Port Overlay Zone and the Northwest Quadrant Overlay Zone do provide some protections and some prohibited or conditional uses out there. So, so there's that piece. And then the area north of I-80 that really is owned by a couple of property owners, big property owners. The city entered into development agreements with those property owners before the creation of the Inland Port, specifically so that we could maintain some control over that development out there. So when we talk about the inland port, the area north of I-80 is really very different from the area south of I-80. The stormwater master plan, David, I know that this has been, it is a, I think you point out really important concerns around stormwater runoff out there. So that's something that the city's been trying to cooperate with the inland port on to get that master planned. I think that Ellis Sorensen has also been working with the inland port to get them the right people at the table to do that plan. So despite the fact that, consultants are expensive, we often rely upon their very important skills to make sure we get it right out there. So just a couple of things that struck me. And then the lawsuit, as I said, just to circle back to that, hopefully we'll get a decision very soon. We feel pretty confident and think that, our attorneys did a great job and we're excited to see the results.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. And thank correction about the land use overriding thing. I'll take that out of the presentation. It's hard to keep up with all this stuff. It evolves pretty quickly.
David, this is Janet Hemming. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the inland port is a done deal and we have no recourse, where are we on that scale of 0 to 10? And what would it take to get it back to neutral to have, as you pointed out, or someone pointed out about the point, where there's more public input and we could put the brakes on this? I'd like to hear from you, and maybe Rachel too.
Well, my opinion is that the key to affecting the course of development at the port is raising public awareness. An amazing number of people, as I go out and just talk about this to folks I meet, aren't even aware that such a thing exists. And if they are aware of it, they don't know very much about it. So I think our best course, if we want to have some real input into the development of the port, is to raise public awareness and get a real public dialogue going about what we want out of this thing. And in order to have a real public dialogue, we need information. And I can't even say that Uefa is withholding the information, because I don't think that anyone has actually done the work to generate the information. And for the time being anyway, this works in Uefa's favor, because if there's no data on which to generate projections, then it's very hard to say it's going to have this kind of impact on our air quality or this impact on our traffic. My particular bailiwick is traffic projection, and you can't project traffic unless you have employment numbers. And as far as I know, Uefa has not published any employment projections. The only number I've seen is the 152 million square feet of warehouse, which is at the very end of its development. So we need information, and we need a higher degree of public awareness.
Hey, David, actually, I'm sorry to jump in, but I'm curious about the figure that you cited with the 10 million gallons of water per day. And, given the discussions that you and I have had about the lack of, knowing kind of what the full build out is. And, based on, from the city perspective, you may know that we're putting into effect a land use regulation that would prohibit any water uses that are over 3 million gallons a day. In the entire city, not just in the inland port area. But how did you arrive at that 10 million gallon figure, not knowing what all is going to happen out there?
Well, I base the traffic and the water estimates on the 152 million square foot number, which is in the strategic business plan that was in the that Uefa put out in 2020 in May. There are standard planning techniques for estimating traffic levels and water consumption based on land use and area. Warehouses, I don't remember the per square foot number, but I arrived at the 10 million gallon number by taking the given typical water consumption of a warehouse per square foot and multiplying it by 152 million.
Hey, David, just circling back, this is Janet. So on a scale of 0 to 10, can you tell us where we are in this continuum? I mean, is it a lost cause, or are we at 5, or how do we get to some neutral point?
Well, on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, I mean, is 0 like we have no influence? Is that how you're envisioning your scale?
Well, 10 is that the inland port is a done deal.
Oh, I see. You want to know the done. Okay.
So 10 is we can't do anything about it. We want to scale, you know, how do we get it back to a 4 or a 5, or a place where there's still some give and take with the public and the legislature and everything else?
Well, as matters stand right now, I would say, you know, we're somewhere around 8 or 9 in terms of it being, you know, it's not that its course is set, because even the people running it don't really know what it is. I mean, if you ask people, you know, what is this place going to have in it, you get a very vague answer, and you'll get different answers from different people. But when I say we're at 8 or 9, I mean, whatever they, that is the board and the people to whom they really listen, decide it's going to be, it's going to be. If we want to have more input so that it's more responsive to the public, then, as I said before, it's about raising public awareness a lot and getting information in order to get real objective ideas about what the impacts will be. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, Janet. Is that what you wanted to know?
Well, it's, and no offense, I think it's just, there's a lot of unknowns. And I mean, the legislature's coming around the corner. I know they're having, you know, pre-legislative meetings right now to sort of set up the agenda for next year. I mean, is this where we start to have some kind of offensive, hate to call it that, but you know, whatever it is, a kind of a public relations, public opinion push? I mean, who do we influence and how do we do it? Maybe this is just, you know, something we need to talk about offline.
Well, a strategy for contacting critical legislators would be very, very important. I mean, I live in Jandelli Provo's district, so you know, I'm preaching to the choir when I talk to her. But people who live in other districts, whose legislators are Republican and who may not be wholehearted supporters of the port, but are going along with the flow, so to speak, might be open to influence. But it's the state legislature where we really need to work.
Ellen?
Uh-huh.
This is James Rogers. I just had a couple comments that I wanted to make in regards to this. You know, David and Dorothy have been highly involved, and I've appreciated them in this process. And I feel like as a board member have been able to incorporate their suggestions, whether it's in the strategic business plan or through public comment, making that more available. I can say firsthand, in my 8th year on the city council, I've never had more public comment or sat through more public comment than I have with the inlet port. So I can honestly say that, Mr. Shearer, that is wholeheartedly my stand on that, and that I have heard more public comment as being a board member on the port than I have in city council. One thing I would highly recommend is seeing if we can get the business consultants available to come and speak to this group. As well as seeing if we can get the executive director, Jack Hedge, and Jill Flygaard to come on board and speak as well in regards to this. There are absolutely unknowns. We know that firsthand, but the more involved we are as a community, the more impact we're going to have in that. And you can see that being involved when we did as a city council, specifically our mayor, in making the changes that we did for the bill, the legislation itself, and being involved as legislation comes up. We know it comes up every single session in regards to the port, being there, having those conversations, having the right connections in order to make those changes. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are, having the seats on the board, not having, you know, the 10% in affordable housing come back, which, you know, is a whole nother conversation that we can have. Is we're looking at creating what I'm calling the West Side Urban Land Fund, WOLF for short, and looking at creating affordability components so that we're not looking at pushing people out. We're creating affordability on the west side. We're creating affordable economic impacts. We're looking at these types of things, but having a seat at the table, we can have what Mr. Shearer is talking about, these policy discussions, because most of this stuff that we're discussing is really going to be root-based in policy, looking at creating a family wage living zone so that we're not looking at these dropship businesses. And I can say firsthand, as being the chair of the Inland Port for 2 years, that's not what we're looking at. We're not looking at warehousing like Amazon, these dropship facilities. We're looking at facilities for manufacturing, creating jobs. Because I can tell you specifically firsthand on the west side, there are so many kids that don't see college as a reachable, attainable goal for them. They're not going to go to the University of Utah and encumber themselves in $70,000 in student debt for a degree that they're not going to be able to use. When we can, through policy, create apprenticeship programs through these businesses like we did as an RDA with Stadler Rail, where we've created an apprenticeship program where these kids can go and learn manufacturing skills, and out of high school make more money than, you know, a lot of attorneys that have passed the bar for the first time and as graduates. So, you know, there's so many opportunities that we can have that are impactful, but, you know, we've got to make sure that we negate those impacts that are detrimental towards the community. And I know firsthand that we will see those. My main concern is we learned it through COVID, through being locked down. People were ordering stuff right and left, you know, through Amazon and through dropship businesses. Where are all those trucks coming from? It's from us. It's from our orders that we're doing, that we're creating this stuff that's coming through. And, you know, through the port, if you've read the strategic business plan, you'll see these satellite operations are strategically placed so that these trucks that have federally regulated times that they can only drive for per day, that it meets that criteria where they can stop, and then their load is taken off and put on rail, and then brought up and then distributed or passed through. We are the crossroads of the West financially, through traffic. We see that through, you know, the interstates, that we have every single interstate crossing through here. So if we don't have these types of conversations with the communities, looking for these impacts, looking for these policy questions that we're trying to negate for these areas, we're never going to achieve what we're trying to as a community as a whole. And, you know, that's why I highly encourage this group to see if we can get the business consultants here, to see if we can, to say we want the business consultants here. We want to have the Inland Port, executive director and his team here to discuss these questions and, you know, get them on the record talking about, you know, policy decisions and making sure that these are the impacts that we want to see that have a positive impact on the community. I mean, right now, Councilmember Ferris could go on for hours talking about trucks in his neighborhood on the weekend that are parked because there's no place for them to go, but they're in his community, parked idling at, you know, over the weekend. He's got trains that are blocking intersections so that strategically people cannot get to and from their own home because they're trapped by trains. You know, quiet zones are another thing that are impactful on the west side. And those are things that have been there since day one. And you know, that's why we have, as a community, as board members, have to have these discussions with Utah Inland Port, not only the directors, but the rest of the board members, so they understand it.
I think Dorothy had a comment, and then Anna also had a comment.
So I think Councilman Rogers raises a good point about bringing people in to talk about what's going on and provide more information. But I think that the people that we need to be talking to, the board needs to be talking to, we need to be talking to, are the people at the point, the consultants at the point, Alan Matheson. So all you have to do is look at what they've done and compare it to what's happening at the Inland Port. And there's a lot that they can share and teach Uefa about how to construct a responsive, transparent, positive development that everybody can be proud of. And you know, that I think is real critical. And I think the more we look at the point, and which could not have existed without moving the prison to West Point, the more we can learn. And I think when I talked with them and they talked about some really innovative stuff that they're planning on doing, we talked about the fact that a lot of what they're doing is being offset by what's not being done at the port. So that type of collaborative approach and discussion could be very beneficial and the type of thing we ought to be pursuing, in my opinion.
For a meeting like next month's meeting, have them come here.
Well, I think it's not just the committee councils that need to hear that. I think it's the people, you know, from the board also, I think would be interested in learning from them. I mean, the people, I don't know how many of the members of the port board or the legislators went to the open house, but it was very beneficial.
Okay. Anna?
Hey, thanks. I'm really happy to be here, and it's an honor to be around so many people that are so much smarter than I am. And James, it's really nice to see you again. I haven't seen you in years and years. I don't know if you remember me, but nice facial hair, and it's good to see you. And I really appreciate and respect what you said about bringing in more business voices on this. Now, I live here on Capitol Hill, and I'm gonna tell you that honestly, I think more important than all those jobs and all those businesses and all the funding and all that, and I'm really tamping down on my potty mouth right now, but all that is not gonna mean nothing if we don't get people talking more about the health aspects. Because every day I Zillow and find out where else I can live that the air isn't so shitty. And every day I see horrific accidents on the freeway when I'm driving 5 minutes on the freeways. We have so many issues going on. And business, blah, blah, blah. I mean, yeah, I order from Amazon every single day. I employ so many people to drive to my house from Amazon, getting my Costco deliveries. I'm part of the problem as far as traffic goes. But I think that we need to hear more voices from doctors, nurses, environmental protectors. Those are the people, because all those people living on the west side, they're gonna all be coughing like I am every day from the smoke. And I mean, I bought a mask a couple of years ago just for the inversion. We need to solve those problems before I give a rat's ass about what kind of business is and how that's gonna, help here. We need to solve the environmental and the health issues.
Anna,
I
I agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, we only have a few air quality monitors on the west side. One of them is at the Salt Lake Center for Science and Education, where my daughter attends. So, and that's the one that repeatedly comes up the worst over and over and over again. So I'm with you. We breathe that air too, and I agree with you. That's why I don't know if you were able to follow along with Aspire and Utah State University and I don't want everyone to feel like I'm defending. I just think that this information needs to get out. But the Utah Inland Port Authority, Aspire, and Utah State have come up with and someone might have to correct me. That's why I think it's important that we get the executive director in here to talk about these things, where they've come up with a hydrogen fuel cell type operations where they have stations that come from Long Beach so that we don't have diesel trucks that are doing that. That if they do come up, there's hydrogen fuel cells that are clean burning compared to what we have with diesel. Yeah, that's why, you know, I know that Mr. Shearer doesn't agree with this, but you know, when I was tasked with hiring the executive director for the Inland Port, and one of those, you know, being involved and having that seat at the table for me was making sure that that executive director understood, starting with a green port, starting with, you know, opportunities that are so far advanced that nobody's ever seen them before. I mean, we're not talking diesel switch yards. We're not talking adding additional rail yards. You know, he's adamant about not having an additional rail yard. He's adamant about making sure that everything's electrified. You know, these are the things that's why I think it's so specific that we can zero in and ask these questions to him point blank to him and have him answer. So, I think that Ellen, it would be highly beneficial for everyone to hear these types of conversations coming directly from the executive director.
I agree. Well, we will get together as a core team and start working on that.
And
What-
if you need help, Ellen, making that request or anything like that, myself and Rachel as board members, I know that I'm throwing her out there. I seem to do that often, and I'm sorry, Rachel, but we'll make sure that we put our voices out there to have them come as well. And I'm more than willing to come back and hear more. And I hear from Mr. Shearer, and I appreciate him and his input, because he's one that actually has logical stuff that is important to the benefit and negating those impacts that we see.
Great, thank you so much. David, have you got UCare, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, Utah Moms for Clean Air? What organizations are championing you?
All of the above, and several others. There's an organization called the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition. And that includes, I think, some 25 or so groups that are concerned about this from various aspects. So this
They don't have a strong speaker. You don't hear a strong message coming from that group. You hear a lot of grumbling, but they don't have a really strong leader that gets out and lays it out really well. I mean, they need to do some PR work or internal whatever, but I've been following them for a long time, and they don't light a fire. They just really don't.
Well, I can say it's not for lack of effort.
Oh, I know, I agree. And I know they're spending a lot of time.
That's why I keep coming back to the need for greater public awareness.
Right. Rachel?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ellen. I wanted to, as we do start kind of quickly approaching the legislative session, I would like to just put on your radar that, that we are going to see inland port legislation this year, as we do every year, even though we may not want to. And I am keeping a close eye on what kind of potential board mix-up there may be this year, or attempts to switch up the representation on the Inland Port Board this year. I know that the cities, we still will be adamant that the city needs to be represented on the Inland Port Board. And, I would maybe flag for all of you that there could be some potential to negotiate some better representation for, the environmental or the health community on that board. And, regardless of whether at the end of the day that ultimately works out, I do think that it's all of our responsibility to at least, realistically request what I think is a very reasonable request to get some good representation for health and environmental groups on that board, or at least a good representative. So keep an eye on that.
So Dorothy, you're recommending that we have Jack and Matheson come? I think you're muted.
Jack Matheson is, Alan Matheson is Jack Hedges' counterpart.
Right.
At the point, long time involved in the Division of Air Quality, is their executive director, has worked with mayors. I just think there's real value, and I have talked with Mr. Matheson about that, of having that type of public discussion to address what appears to be major environmental injustice between two organizations that were supposed to be similar and yet have developed very differently.
Okay, we'll work on that for next month's meeting. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thanks for your input. Thanks, James. Good to see you. David, great presentation. We really appreciate it. We'll get that presentation out and keep us posted, direct us. You have us as a platform to distribute information, and however else we can help, let us know. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Wear your mask.
Yep. Get your shot.
Get your shot.